Good morning, everyone, and good evening to those who are joining in from India. And so, welcome to the Bahujan Scholars webinar series. And I'll provide a very brief intro of what is Bahujan Scholars Seminar Series. So, it is a non-profit registered in the US. The Bahujan Scholars is a network of graduate students, faculty, and professionals outside India. The network's purpose is to support scholars from Bahujan communities, build networks, and provide mentoring, both uh, group and personalized. And it also organizes online events, um, just like one we have right now. And the events are mostly on academic and professional development topics. And you can access the webinars online on YouTube. And I'll be posting the link in the chat box. So I am Jayaprakash Sharma. I am postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Advanced Study of India at the University of Pennsylvania. And my research focuses on extractive development, citizenship, and democratic participation among Adivasi communities in Jharkhand. And for today's webinar, we have Professor Carmel Christy, um, who is a cultural studies scholar interested in the politics and affective manifestations of gender, environment, caste, and urban space in South Asia. She's an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Women's and Gender Studies at Syracuse University. Her first book, Sexuality and Public Space in India, Reading the Visible, which came out in 2017, discusses the hyper visibility of women's sexuality in relation to caste. She is working on her next monograph about urban caste ecologies in coastal South India. And today she's going to talk about one of the most crucial aspect of research, that is how to do literature review. And so speakers usually have 40 to 45 minutes for their talk, and then that is followed by Q&A. Over to you, Professor um, Christy, and um I'll uh, slightly nudge you, like when we have 10 minutes left to 40 minutes, so that we can transition into Q&A. So please welcome Professor Christie for a talk on uh, how to do literature review.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you for this generous introduction. And first of all, thank you for inviting me to talk about review of literature. We know that there is no standard template for it, but I'll try to give some examples and talk about some of the techniques we could use when we write review of literature. Before that, I would really like to applaud the efforts of Bahujan International to provide this platform uh, to to talk about writing practice, academic practices, networking opportunities. Because I am a beneficiary of several such groups. I did my PhD from University of Hyderabad, and Dalit Bahujan reading groups were a huge part of how my political and academic outlook came to be. So it's something very important for Dalit Bahujans to create and critically engage with the field of academics, which can be really intimidating for many people. So I think these platforms are so important in cultivating this aspect of community making, thinking together, working together, thinking about creating a broader scholarship, broader body of scholarship on critical caste questions in South Asia and beyond. So thank you, Bharat, for all your efforts, Gaurav, Jay, everybody who is involved with this project. And once again, thank you for inviting me. And thank you everyone for joining. I know it's late in India. It's 8:30, 8:45. So thanks for joining us this evening to discuss review of literature. I see some familiar names. Thank you for coming, and I look forward to having more conversations after I talk about um, my contributions to this seminar. So let me take a moment to share my screen. Can you all see this? Okay. All right. So as I said, there is no standard format which we can use to write review of literature. But of course, as we know, when we get trained in methodologies, there is a structure that we are taught in um, academic training about structuring an article, structuring a dissertation, or structuring a book. So I'll present some of those standard procedures, but it doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it. This is just for us to, work with something, right? When we think about a structuring an article, these are some of the elements that we usually need to have when writing an article. Um, so I'm a cultural studies scholar, which is more interdisciplinary. So for us, the scholarship is drawn from different humanities, social sciences disciplines, or even, sometimes even from natural sciences to kind of explain the questions that we are addressing. For instance, in my research right now, where I discuss urban caste ecologies, there is this part about marine ecologies where I have to understand the marine biological species and several other things to talk about broader power relations that constitute coastal India. So this is to say that this is a standard structure that we follow, and I'm sure this is very preliminary. All of you might know this, but I'll just go through it for the sake of explaining it. The first part is introduction, where we provide a background, where we explain what are we going to study and why are we studying it, right? What is our research theme, and why is it important to do that? And then we also give a sense of what is coming, what are the sections, how are you going to present your arguments and your analysis through different sections. So introduction has these three main elements in a standard article. That is, what are you going to do, what is your theme, and the second element is why is it important. So you have to place it in the broader background of the debates in relation to that topic. And finally, you will explain which are the sections, what are the sections that are in the paper which help you arrive at the question that you are taking up. So that's your introduction. The next is your, usually next part is your review of literature, which we are going to discuss in depth. What is review of literature? So review of literature is uh, basically writing down and explaining important scholarship in the field of your study in relation to your topic. So if, for instance, if I'm doing something like land and caste question in Maharashtra, there is a lot of literature on land and caste in Maharashtra, right? So we can't be using all that. That would be such a humongous project in itself. So we look at, of course, we'll make sense of what it is, what already exists, and then we start reading something that is closer to what we are going to do. For instance, if you are going to work on land, caste, and water in Maharashtra, you will start looking at scholarship on environment, caste, or caste and environmental struggles in Maharashtra, or what it is in relation to environmental scholarship in India broadly, and so on, right? So you start somewhere then when you read whichever article or book you are reading, you'll also look at its bibliography. Who have they referred to, right? So that you get a sense of this is how that scholarship is built. This is probably something I should look into as well. If there are arguments that are speaking to what I am doing, I'll go back to that article or book mentioned in the bibliography and I'll read that as well. So, in review of literature, usually you engage with important scholarship that speaks to your research. So it's not just summarizing the existing research, but critically looking at that research in relation to your research question. So we'll talk about it more in the next section. Uh, the after review of literature, sometimes you have a methodology section, but sometimes in some disciplines, like for instance, my discipline, methodology, review of literature becomes methodology too. But in social sciences, you have a clear methodology chapter as well. So, for a lot of theoretical disciplines, in review of literature, the theory becomes interpretive theory becomes method too. But if you are, say, in anthropology, you will have to definitely enumerate um, which is your field, why did you choose that, what are the, I think we need to mute somebody here.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so in methodology, you describe how you approach your field, what's your sample size, why did you choose that, um, how are you going to go about your method. Basically, you establish that your method is the right method and you have systematically followed a strategy, a method to get the right materials that are required for your analysis. And next section, you will use all your materials analysis to establish your arguments, and then you have a conclusion. So this is just going through a rudimentary structure of an article or a dissertation. So now let's go to, let's see what is review of literature. I already mentioned this. It is a critical analysis of existing scholarship. So it is not just summarizing existing scholarship, but it is critically analyzing existing scholarship. So what does that mean? When we critically analyze, we are looking at that scholarship, we are understanding it, but we are also trying to look at it to see how much of it is beneficial, is useful for us, how much of it addresses the questions that they are addressing, what are the gaps in that, what do they address really well, what are the gaps they don't address really well, right? So any scholarship for that matter will have gaps, will have its strengths. So we are going to understand any text that we read for its strength as well as for its gaps or as well as for its limitations, right? And one thing that I want to mention here is that when we do this critical analysis, it is also important for us to be generous about how we critically approach it, because any scholar who does work, it is immense amount of work that is being put into producing any piece of scholarship. So, and it is not possible for somebody to like cover everything in their scholarship. So even when we critique somebody's work, it's important for us to fully engage with it, but not just talk about what it lacks, but also talk about what it has, right? So that is a productive way of engaging with other people's work in review of literature. Um, when we read I mean, as we progress as grad scholars, we it becomes easier for us to see through text when we read, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, and so on. So to register that, it's important to stay with the text, right? We may understand it when we read it for the first time, but go through it again uh, to fully to fully respect that text. So that's very important part of review of literature. And we do this critical analysis to help us think about our research questions and explain that and show that in our review of literature. How does all this literature helps us arrive at the questions that we are asking? Why are we asking these questions? If there is so much literature about something that we are studying, then why are we still studying something in the same field? Right? Probably there is something new, some materials that we are going to introduce. So, whatever that is, identify that by engaging with this literature. What are we bringing above and beyond this existing literature? So, so how do we do this? This is the essence of what we are trying to do. But how do we do this is something I'll try to explain in the next few slides. So I'll explain one of the articles I wrote some time ago. This is from 2019. The article is titled Janu and Selena Narrating Life, Subjects and Spaces. It was published in this book called Dalit Texts, Aesthetics and Politics Reimagined. It was edited by Judith Misra Ibarak, K. Satyanarayana, and Nicole Thiera. So I chose this text because I thought it is something that's closer to what I was doing as a cultural studies scholar. Now, though now my work is a little bit different from how it was earlier, but I thought this could show some of the important questions around review of literature. So, this is the structure of this article. It is a 15-page article. It's not a very long article. It has an introduction where I introduce the place. So, the title of the article was Janu and Selena Narrating Life, Subjects and Spaces. Right. So, in the introduction, I tried to place the space, the place, uh, who who are Janu and Selena. They are Dalit and Adivasi women land rights activists, and their life writings, biographies were written by other people. So I was looking at these life writings and trying to understand what does the struggle for land mean for them as Dalit Adivasi women leaders. So that is the whole crux of the article. So this is how I went about it. This is the structure of my article. The first part is introduction. The second part is genre of autobiography beyond binaries. So can you guess what that is according to the structure we discussed earlier? Is that methodology or is that review? Is that analysis? So this is the review. This is where I engage with the scholarship on autobiography, biographies, land, caste question to frame my materials, to frame my analysis. And these two parts, experiencing caste through land, spaces inside and out, shaping the subject. These are my analytical sections. So this is what we are going to talk about, genre of autobiography beyond binaries. How did I arrive at that? How did I choose to keep this as my review of literature? And why did I choose the literature I cite in this paper? Right. So as I said, I was looking at Janu and Selena's biographies transcribed by others, transcribed by other writers. One of them, Selena's biography, was transcribed by two Dalit scholars. Janu's biography at that time was transcribed by another artist. So these are the biographies I was looking at. So for me, the there are these biographies, there are these texts, but what are the important strands that I am taking from them? What are the important strands I want to talk about? So to me, both of them some of the biggest land struggle that has happened, and you don't see many of them as, leaders in public spaces, at least until 2000s, late
Uh,
2010s in
s-
Kerala.
Christy, sorry to interrupt. I think we lost some part of the sentences just a couple of seconds ago. So could you please repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I'm sorry about that. Um, is it because I was not audible enough, or you think it was Wi-Fi?
There was some disturbance in the sound.
All right, all right. Yeah, so we were talking about Janu and Selena's biographies, and I was saying that why 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 do Janu and Selena's biographies are important, and what was significant for me to take from their biographies, which could be beneficial to create uh, an understanding of Dalit Adivasi struggles for land, and at the same time, what does it mean for them to be Dalit Adivasi women leaders in these struggles? So this question to me was land as material resource, that is the struggle they were leading, but at the same time, it doesn't stop at being uh, material resource, right? Having land is also important in shaping one's mental space, one's subjectivity. So it is at the conflation of both material and symbolic space, that is land as material resource and land as space that constitutes your own subjectivity as resisting beings, as radical beings, or as just as beings, right? So for me, what I identified as important categories for me to engage with in scholarship was, of course, caste and its relationship with land, space, and gender. And so once I identified these three categories, then the question is, how do I string them together? How do I string the scholarship around these three categories with autobiography, right? Because autobiography is what I'm analyzing, but at the same time, it's also beyond texts, right? So for me to think about these categories, I had to first define autobiography in a way. I have to first understand or establish autobiography in such a way that it speaks to these three categories, right? So, how do I connect all these three together through my review of literature? So, let me talk about that. So, my review of literature, which is this part, genre of autobiography, it starts by talking about what is autobiography. And I use one of the definitions that was proposed by these two scholars, Sidney Smith and Julia Watson, where they talk about all kinds of self-referential writings as life writing, because autobiography is one form of life writing. There are biographies, there are people like for instance, a lot of um, writings of marginalized people were transcribed by other people, because for many reasons, some of them couldn't write, some of them didn't have access to publishing world, and so on, right? So how do we centralize those knowledge systems, and how can we look at the kind of knowledge that is generated through writing their lives as beneficial, as useful, and as histories, as knowledge itself in on different platforms. So I thought the term life writing to refer to Janu's and Salina's books were very useful, because it kind of registers the churning in producing um, self-referential texts for Dalit Bahujan women, because it is Janu's text, as I said, was written by somebody else, so was Salina's text, right? Janu came up with another her own writing much later in life. a few years ago. But especially in 2000s, 2010s, such writings were very few by these leaders in Kerala. So life writing kind of captures this historical friction, historical impossibility of creating one's own narrative, but at the same time, these narratives are available through other writings and other writers' engagement with them. So the word I use to analyze these texts is life writing. And then the question to think about is, what is life writing? What is autobiography? Autobiography or life writing is basically narrating somebody's experience, right? It is all about creating a self by narrating one's experience, right? I talk about this is how I understood things, this is how I led struggles, and so on. So it is narrating experience. But what is experience, right? Is experience self evident? Experience is historically processed. It is historically understood. That's why the same experience, we may think of it differently after several years, right? Our attitude, our understanding of the same experience differs after some time, or the same experience for two people could have different meanings, the way they process it. So it's the historicity of experience is something that makes autobiography or life writing an important genre to understand. The historicity through which subjects are cast, the historicity through which their experiences give us a sense of what history is, what our society is, what our politics is. So that's what makes it a valuable text for us to analyze. So I establish this aspect of experience as specific to different kinds of people, and therefore, all kinds of autobiographies or life writings that we encounter are also very different. All kinds of, if you look at the life writings of people from marginalized backgrounds, or other backgrounds, um, or more privileged backgrounds, there is a clear difference, at least until like 2010, if we look at them. So the second part is this effort to understand the difference in the formation of subject according to experience. So narrating the self, how does one narrate the self? Who can narrate the self? Who is able to make the narration of their self the history of that society itself, or whose narratives are seen as very vernacular, right? So there is a way in which, for instance, if you think about it, Gandhi's or Nehru's autobiographies are seen as the history of the country itself, or even for that matter, somebody like EMS Namboodiripad, who was a prominent communist leader of Kerala. His autobiography is seen as something that's a history of Kerala itself, or in post-independent history of Kerala itself. So what I here the connection that is made is all these autobiographies written by especially by male politicians from privileged backgrounds, they seem to present a unified subject. I did this, I did that, and I led this, right? So there is a way in which this unified subject seems to have done things for that society, which is a very Kantian way of understanding the subject. Subject is fully formed. I am already formed, and then I am doing things for everyone, right? And that's what is coming out through many of these biographies or autobiographies of these privileged male leaders. But of course, the Kantian unified subject has been criticized by several scholars. There is also a criticism of, scholars like Alan Badiou and many other scholars talk about how the subject is fragmented. The subject is not, there is no pre-subject that exists, but the subject is always evolving and in process. But at the same time, there is also a criticism of this of this fragmented subject from scholars like bell hooks, right? Because one of the criticisms that bell hooks raise is that the marginalized subjects are beginning to articulate themselves in this moment as political beings. So now we can't even talk about that process of subject formation as something that is useful for this moment, and then we are prioritizing, we are kind of considering them as coming behind in some ways. So she kind of challenges those kind of dismissal of the subject. So she's not, of course, aligning with Kantian unified subject, but she's also kind of criticizing the postmodern fragmented subject in some ways. So, in similar vein, you can also see scholars like Judith Butler talking about how we need to recognize the subject, but also be open to the possibilities of changing, of getting shaped by all kinds of events that are around us. Then I also discussed one of the autobiographies from slightly earlier period to discuss, to show an example. For instance, a baby Campbell's autobiography called The Prisons We Broke, which was published in the 80s. So a lot of conversations around autobiographies of Dalit women from that period um, sometimes uses the pronoun we instead of I. So there was this theorization by several scholars that the use of we instead of I in their autobiographies um, show some kind of publicness to their lives, because what they talk about in their autobiographies is a lot about their struggles, their protests, their ways of navigating all kinds of difficult caste relationships and so on. So several scholars have emphasized the publicness of their lives, or the public participation that becomes crucial in their lives. And there is very little, according to them, especially scholars like Anupama Rao talk about this, and even I think Maya Pandit, who translated Kamble's autobiography, also talks about this as a certain matter of fact exteriority of Dalitness in articulating the Dalit subject. But from this engagement, something that I argue by using scholars like Rekha Raj is that the use of we, or the use of public, or theorizing the use of we as publicness stems from our lack of engagement with those life writings by reading in between the lines through a historical lens. Because what were the possibilities of these people to form collectivities historically? How much of that was possible? So when subjects articulate, they articulate differently. There is no one way in which subjects are expected to articulate. So then, as scholars, our effort is to make sure that we are able to read in between the lines with a historical lens, with an analytical lens, to bring about the depth of subjects rather than thinking about a subject as linearly publicly shaped, because any human subject is shaped with depth of space and time. It's not just one layer of space that one navigates, but it is this unified navigation of time and space that creates, and that through which a subject navigates their life. So that's something I kind of establish in this part, which sets the tone for what's coming, my materials, right? And so all this scholarship about subject, how does this connect to land? How does this connect to space? So here, land and space, when we think about land, as I said, we think of it as a material resource. Space is space is kind of a combination of material resource which informs our imaginative world as well. So a person, right? For a person, their subjectivity is a combination of all kinds of material as well as imaginative spaces, imaginative resources. It is not one thing. It is so deeply connected between the material resource as well as the imaginative resources. So this is something the scholar called Michel de Soto, he talks about place and space. So place is the physical space, while space is both physical as well as imaginative, right? So that's so land in this case becomes this material resource for which Janu and Selena are fighting for, leading struggles for. And space is that space where they conceive this struggle, where they conceive themselves, they keep evolving as political and full subjects, in public as well as in private. So how do I connect this? Through scholarship. So in my review of literature, so I use Gopal Guru and Gopal Guru's articulation of Ambedkar's activism, Ambedkar's work. And I also use Radhika Mohanram in talking about space and place. So let me show an example of how I do this. Okay, before I go to the example, how to decide what to take from a text, right? Because there is so much in a text. When we read a text, there is so much. So one thing probably we could do is in the first reading, think about what is the summary of this article. Just write down or think about a general summary of the article that you are reading after you read it once. Then extract the main arguments from the text. What are they proposing? What is their original contribution in this article? Right? So, first we wrote a summary. So, what's the difference between a summary and extracting arguments? So, when we summarize, we don't necessarily need to, write down just the arguments. We would be thinking about the broader field they are establishing and the whole narrative they are building. But when we think about the arguments, what are the materials they analyzed and what did they arrive at? Those are the arguments that we are going to read the article, then we have the summary, go through it, and find the arguments that they are making from that summary and your reading. So if it is not evident from the first reading, even after the summary, go back to it. At least in the second reading, we will be able to spot those arguments. Or if not in the second reading, go back to it again and find those arguments. And once we have those arguments, think about how can this be related to your work? Can you use it for your work? So to me, a researcher's main task is to relate your work to other scholarship and other broader questions, right? But sometimes some scholarship probably doesn't speak to your work at all. But it's always useful to think about if there is a connection that you can make. But if you think that it's totally off, probably you can look for other articles. So for me, this is how it works sometimes, but this is not a standard procedure that anybody needs to follow. But I think especially in the first few years of our grad school, it is we are still learning how to read. So probably this is something one could consider. So here is an example of what I was telling you about the Gopal Guru's article, how I used it. So the article I used was Gopal Guru's article, Experience, Space, Justice, from the book The Cracked Mirror. And I mean, it's an excellent article. If one is working on space justice caste questions. So, I mean, there are many arguments that he makes, but some of the things that were useful to me for this article were these uh, two arguments that I took from it. That is how he establishes land space as foundational to caste hierarchies. So he does a brilliant job of using this Marxist geographer Henry Lefebvre. I actually like Gopal Guru's interpretation of Lefebvre than Lefebvre himself. So that's a brilliant move that he makes. So that connection he makes, land and space is foundational to caste hierarchies. Then, so if you say that land and space is foundational to caste hierarchies, when you say space, this myths of both these, it is, according to him, it is also through the complex experience of the symbolic, that is the space and the material land, that Dalit subjectivities are shaped, right? So landlessness is not just about not having some material resource, but it is also about who you become, or what does that do to your subjectivities. So he extensively addresses the question of experience through space and land. So this was a crucial takeaway for me from this article, though there are many other things he does, but this was what I thought was useful for me. So how did I use this in my article? So I just copy pasted the part where I used it. So the first part where I used it was Guru discusses how the victims' objects constitute themselves as subjects in discriminatory spaces by radically discovering oneself as an active or reflective agency. Taking cues from Guru, the attempt here is to understand the complex processes through which Dalit women imagine their material as well as conceptual spaces and transform them into space of radical politics and being. So here is the first sentence. Guru discusses experience. How does experience shape one as a radical agent? So experience doesn't necessarily, discriminatory experience does not merely shape people as victims, which is what a lot of earlier analysis did. So Guru is kind of challenging that existing thread of victimhood that is spoken about again and again, by saying that this is also a space that they carve out for themselves by reflectively engaging with the discrimination, and they become radical active agents through their experiences. So it is not just one linear line of victimhood that these subjects embrace, but they actively reshape themselves by engaging with it. So this is something I took to think about Janu and Selena's active agency in reshaping the public and gender politics of Kerala in many ways. So that's one thing. So that's experience. One thing I took from Guru's article is experience and reflective radical agency. The second thing, oh, let me, yeah. So how did it help my article? This supports my direction of exploring Dalit Adivasi women land rights activists' experience of landlessness and outcasting as crucial in creating their radical subjectivity. So how do these women, Janu used to work in a plantation, used to work for a landlord. She's an Adivasi activist. So how did she become an activist? She didn't study in any of those, social work courses or anything, but she became an activist. So what was that process like? For Salina, she grew up as a Dalit Christian in some of the driest areas of Kerala, and she became a leader of Changara land struggle along with other male leaders. So how did that shift happen? How does the leadership evolve? So this itself gave me this framework to identify, to read through this text, to look at those process of reflection and creating something anew. When we think about, especially the case of Janu, in early 2000s, she was a major figure in bringing up the question of Adivasi land rights, how she was, how she was arrested, she was tortured by the state, and so on, and her face became so familiar, the which was not the case earlier. So she kind of appears on the screen. I'm sure she has been working on the grassroots for a very long time, but this is the moment in which she comes up in the public space in this big way. So Guru's excerpt gave me this perspective to think about, to look for reflective agency in their texts. It's So again, these are the points that I kind of took from the text: experience, reflectivity, interiority, protest, struggles together, shaping their subjectivity. So as I said, we have talked about how a certain publicness was more talked about in relation to Dalit autobiographies, Dalit protests, and so on. But when we look at Janu and Selena's work, you also see that these are women who are navigating all kinds of gender politics, all kinds of personal relations. So you cannot reduce their whole being to just being these resisting figures. They are resisting figures, but resistance cannot be just reduced to an exteriority and certain forms of publicness. So that's why interiority is such an important thing. And it is also a methodological intervention as well, because to think about life writing as something to be read through absences as well, not just through what is present, because absences are also historical. What is not there is also because of a certain historicity. So to look at interiority of such figures, probably it's also important to look at the historicity of it, to use multiple sources, to talk to them, to find out what is missing in the text and what was there, or what was written and what was not written. So it is through this multiple methodological interventions you read the text and you read beyond the text as well. So that's an exercise probably I had to do to understand the conflation of exteriority and interiority together. So thinking through that, not just reducing them to merely protesting figures, but also people navigating multiple realms of being. This helped me think about critically looking at some of the existing scholarship that emphasizes a certain publicness of Dalit subjects, which could be one of the small interventions that this article does. Right. So I think I spoke a lot. Now, this is uh, another episode where I use Gopal Guru. So I wanted to ask you if any of you can think, any of you can think through how I use Gopal Guru and Mohan Ram to support my argument here. I mean, you don't need to answer, but since we already discussed how I use Guru once, but this is the second time I used his work, and Radhika Mohan Ram too. So, can you think of any comments, suggestions? I'll read it out. What I wrote. Spaces of various kinds constitute the subject in negotiation with its temporality. That's my preface to citing Radhika Mohan Ram. As Radhika Mohan Ram remarks, place and landscape are not inert but things which actively participate in the identity formation of the individual. Guru has pointed out how the historically produced and reproduced social ghetto has been instrumental in shaping Ambedkar's conceptual vocabulary around contradictions in social relations. The experience of Salila and Janu with the spaces they inhabit and interact with may thus be viewed as instrumental in the evolution of their conceptual language around land, power, and caste that constitute their subjectivity. So, yeah, so you can see that I'm trying to string together the idea of space and land together by using Radhika Mohanram and Guru, and thinking about how Guru talks about Ambedkar's radical agency, radical interventions, and how it was informed by both material and symbolic forms of ghettoization that he has faced as a scholar and as a leader. So it became, it could, all this scholarship could give me the ground to go about my analysis. And so I'll stop here, and I would like to take questions, any comments you have, any feedback.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Christie. It was such an informative and uh, remarkably lucid explanation of such a complex sort of like, in topic, as in how to research or study subjectivity. And I think we started with what to review in your literature, and then going into how to review it, and then finally what to do what you have reviewed with. So I won't take much time, but I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. I do have a couple of questions, but I would come at the last in the queue. But I'll invite the audience to go ahead and ask questions. Please keep your questions brief and to the point. And either you can, as unmute yourself and switch on your cameras and directly direct your question to Professor Christie, or you can also use the chat box.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
quick
Bharat, you wanted to
announcement.
say? Yeah, sure.
Quick announcement. Please give your feedback. We posted a feedback link. Please give your feedback for our event and how we can improve. So that would be helpful to organize this kind of programs and events. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I just wanted to thank you so much for inviting me for today's session. It was such a beautiful presentation, Carmel Christy ji. It was like meditating. It was so beautiful, like it was smooth and like it was so neat. Thank you so much. I enjoyed thoroughly, and I felt like, oh, already finished. Like I wanted to listen more. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those kind words, Anita. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Uh,
Uh,
Hello,
we-
ma'am. My name is Kamna, and I'm doing my PhD from Delhi University in English literature. And your session directly spoke to my research as I work on autobiographies. So the essay that you discussed, and basically, like, the craft of literature review, the way you were describing, like certain, like it in the form of certain questions, it actually gave me a system that I could probably approach as somebody who gets really overwhelmed with so many things. I keep reading, I keep accumulating bibliographies and things, and then I'm not able to figure out how do I utilize it. So your session actually gave me a big structure, like, how do I approach it through questions, and also some of your insights about autobiographies. I'm going to actually look up your work after this session, as it really helped me, like it really directly spoke to my own research on autobiographies. I just wanted to thank you for it. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you
we
so
don't
much.
get this structure in here. I mean, this is something that I've struggled with here at my own university, that like there are no structures that are given, there are no uh, sessions that are centered around how do we process uh, such big chunk of information, how do we like go about it. It's like we are assumed, like it's expected of us that we already know how to do all of this. And in turn of that, like in trying to figure that out, especially for people who are like me, I do not come from either an English speaking family. I am the first woman in my family to actually enter research, and it gets really overwhelming at times that I don't know how to figure it out, how to not get it wrong. and how to also at the same time justify my own space in that English department. So the session was really affirming. Just wanted to tell you that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kamna. I'm so glad to hear that it was useful for you. And trust me, you will find your way. It's I mean, I also studied without, having a structure to work with, but I'm sure you will find your way. And yeah, when we write, I think something to uh, because with internet now we have so many resources. We know how much information exists, but then, like you said, what to read, what's the first thing to read. So sometimes it's useful to read something that is really well established, and then use that bibliography to follow other works. Because otherwise, if we keep looking at the body of work that is there, it's so intimidating, right? There is so much, but trust me, all we don't need all that work. We just need, um, I mean, when we write for an article, I think for this article, I may have used about 15 scholars. About 15 scholars whom I thought were important. I'm sure there were other scholars who were important too. But I think to look for questions that are bothering you, that you think are important, Kamna, that's where we get to figure out our way about around whom to read. Of course, it's good to read as much as possible, but that's not. Uh, I don't think we should aim for that when we start. We start with the easiest texts, probably, and then expand on it. And once you start writing summaries, it becomes easier to connect it to your work. But it's also another thing. There is no other way to do it. We have to just, read and write down, especially when you are writing a dissertation. I think or a book. That's the only way for us to do it. And I hope your work goes very well, and we get to read it at some point, Kamna.
Thank you so much for your kind word, ma'am. I definitely am trying. And yes, I think that's one thing that I've realized, the ways through you have to actually just read. I mean, like sometimes I get my readings wrong, or like I just choose readings and then I find out later that this was not useful. Or how do I actually use it to build the argument, and which is something that you very neatly demonstrated when we were talking about Gopal Guru's essay and the establishment of the link of land and caste and how you utilize that for your essay. I think that was very useful for me, because now I can, like, now I will, like, even through my overwhelm, I will be able to ask some of those questions that sort of make it a little easier. Thank you
Yeah.
so much once again.
And thank you, Kamna, for such a wonderful question. And also, I would uh, just add something that don't be afraid of getting something wrong. So we all get wrong in this process. There is a process of getting something wrong and like getting it corrected, So and another thing is, as in, we should be grateful of this initiative, Bahujan Scholars initiative, that is bringing all these scholars from different disciplines, from different parts of the world together, and given this sort of like such an crucial opportunity to learn from others. So I would recommend that you spread the word and let others also know that there is this platform that is helping out those who really lack crucial infrastructure, connections, and capital to, especially in academia, to as in move ahead. Okay, so we'll move on to the next uh,
Sanket
question.
raised hand.
Sanket raised their hand.
Yeah, so thank you for the session. This was really informative as I am also doing research
Sanket, I think we lost you.
about
Could you please go again? I think we lost your voice.
oh, at some point you mentioned about reading the text and going beyond the text. So I just wanted some more information on that. Was I audible?
Could you please repeat that? Because I think that,
Okay, okay, okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
your voice broke up. Yeah.
So I was having two questions. One was that once you mentioned reading the text and going beyond the text. So I just wanted to get more information on that. And the other one was that sometimes I also get confused to relate the literature to my research, whatever research I'm doing. So, how can we relate the work we are doing to the research? Can there be some simple points that we can keep in mind every time uh, while doing that? Yeah.
Thank you, Sanket, for asking these very difficult questions, uh, but very important. Um, I think the first question, reading the text and beyond the text, um, especially like when we deal with texts such as those are coming from Dalit Bahujan backgrounds, we know the difficult relationship the communities have with written texts, published forms. So we cannot just take those texts as the only material. I mean, we can take it, but we also need to think about the historicity of the text itself, right? Because the text is such a privileged form when it comes to a lot of marginalized communities, including Dalit Bahujan communities. So, because of that reason, of course, we read the text, but we also talk to the people who wrote the text. We also look at the responses to the text. We also think about when did this kind of life writings started getting published and what was important about that time, right? And what was the language used? Was it the similar language that as that of previous texts? So basically, when I said beyond the text, what I meant was we are also using materials that are not in the text as well to make sense of this text, because we understand this text is historical, right? Historical means it is shaped by this time and space. So why did this text appear in this time and space, right? So we are asking historical questions. We are reading in between the lines, right? We know the post 90s how a certain kind of politics emerges in India in relation to caste, and how are these publishing of these life writings are informed by that moment, right? And thinking about so as I said, both Janu and Selena didn't write these texts. They narrated these events to somebody and they put together this text. So, how do I find their life through the narration that was created by somebody else? Right? So, it's not I cannot just rely on that text to find them, right? I can use that text, but it's also important for me to talk to them. It's also important for me to talk to the writers. Why did they choose certain events over the other events? There many events happen in their lives, but the writers only chose some events, right? And why that becomes important. So that's why I think when we look at these states, we should, otherwise I would also end up reproducing the kind of theorizations which reduced their subjectivity to a certain form of resistance, or public forms of resistance, right? Their life is also way beyond that as well. So it is to capture this that we need to locate the text through multiple sources. So that's what I meant when I said beyond the text as well. Actually, a scholar, I think it was Tanika Saka, who talks about the reading between the lines when they were talking about this Bengali woman's autobiography from 19th century. So so there is I mean there is some scholarship around that in relation to women's autobiography, but of course what we are looking at is from a different moment, a different kind of endeavors that these leaders were engaged in.
Okay, thank you. Now we have,
I,
sorry,
I
you
think
there.
I think Sanket had one more question. So sorry, Gara, I'll just take a moment to answer the second question.
Yeah,
Uh,
please go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, it was how to relate the text. That's a very difficult uh, one to answer because there is no standard template for sure, right? Because everybody's research is different. Your case, even if we do work on life writing, you and I may approach it differently. But at the same time, do we have to read the established texts in the field? Then through that, first read that, then think about what is missing or uh, what are you not getting from that text, and that will lead you to find texts that are probably talking to your text. So it is important to start reading something. Don't get intimidated by this, huge body of scholarship. Start somewhere, and that will lead you to the text that you need. So starting and engaging with a text is the first step, but I don't have any blueprints to give you about how to relate to it. I'm sure you will arrive at it once you start engaging with these texts in detail. Maybe I mean, if you talk about your research, we could have had more discussion about how we can narrow down the text and how we could relate that maybe sometime later.
Okay, thank you, Professor Christie. Now we have Gaurav with raised his hand, I think. Yeah, Gaurav, please go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jay, and thank you, Christy, for this such a fascinating presentation on the literature review. Though my question is about, I mean, what is very similar to what Sanket was talking about. So we are, I mean, I'm from sociology, and we do this research and all. And though my background is from literature as well. So in social science research, and Jay would agree with me on this, that when we do this, we collect data. And it's one of the limitation or a complexity of qualitative data that I'm highlighting, because you guys also deal with qualitative data. So when we collect, we gather data, and then when we analyze, so what we often do is that, we only qualitative researchers, they only pick up those quotation or citation that fits in their argument, and rest of the data actually does not matter to them, right? And this is basically a kind of the limitation of the qualitative research. So now my question to you is that, if every qualitative analysis is necessarily selective, is cultural studies, which is your area, is cultural studies also uncovering meanings that are embedded in culture, or is it producing meanings through the theoretical through the theoretical lenses it brings to the evidence? So where should we, in a way, what I'm trying to say, where should we draw a line between the interpretation and projection? Or to put it in a different way, that to what extent is cultural studies vulnerable to the confirmation bias, where theoretical frameworks such as, like all the frameworks, Marxism, feminism, or post-colonial, whatever, or critical race theory, or now we have critical caste study, not only the interpretation of data, but also determine which data are considered significant in the first place. So where should we draw a line? I mean, how do you deal that in cultural studies?
Well, that's a very difficult question, Gaurav. Thank you for bringing this up, because that's the main struggle that we face as researchers. What to take, which data to choose, and like you said, what should be the interpretation and projection of what you are studying. So I understand the disciplinary requirements of several disciplines, where you have to present um, citations in a certain way. But at the same time, I mean, as a scholar who was trained in cultural studies and who is also like my current project is about urban space making, urban cast ecologies, protests, coastal spaces, and so on, where I have to navigate, like you said, both the material data,
Mhm.
the kind of data, as we call it, through these frames. uh, for me, what is worked, or what I think works, is um, thinking about the research question and framing the research questions first, and thinking through. Of course, you have the field, you have the materials, you have everything. Then through that, what's the most evident and most pressing research question that is coming out of this? And of course, that's informed by this time, definitely, this space, definitely, all that is. So for in cultural studies, we are trained to understand, or um, trained to create or theorize on the basis of conjectural understanding, the time and space in which we analyze. That's what informs what we produce in some ways. Of course, there are times when big scholars produce something that is way ahead of time too. But what we are, for instance, the same article that I wrote, I don't think I'll write it this way after 6, 7 years right now. It would be different because of the ways in which the time has changed. So there is no universality to the knowledge we produce, right? It stands for that time and space, and it gives people a sense of that historical knowledge in that sense. So it becomes part of that historical evolution. So basically, what I'm saying is there is no ultimate right way to do it, but I think the ethical center of your research question might help you to choose what is most important from this set of data that you have gathered. And also, when we think about questions of caste, something that guided me is to look at the work of Dalit Bahujan scholars, and how can we use that to understand our data. Of course, we use all kinds of scholarship, but at the same time, this scholarship uh, should help us navigate the questions that we are addressing, if there is any writing in the field that we are looking at. So I think developing that understanding of um, how our research question should be rooted uh, in that ethical center, but that probably helps us choose from this whole gamut of evidence and data that we have collected. And as we understand, data is never self-evident, right? Data is very subjective. The data that is there, even the experiments that we do, the questions that we take up, like I am doing urban cast ecologies now, I wouldn't have done that like 10 years ago, right? So that is informed by this time when new questions have come. My experiences have changed, or I am processing my experiences differently from earlier. Even Janu and Selena, if I write it now, I would have thought about the environmental and climate question in their writing, which I didn't do in that article. This is to say that we produce historical knowledge, so it evolves over a period of time. So I think that with that understanding, we can only produce what is informed by this time with those limitations as a scholar.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Christie. We are also subject of the like historicization,
Exactly.
subjected by the limits of history.
Yeah.
Thank you. And now I'll move on to, we have another question, Anjali Sundaran. And yeah, please go ahead, Anjali.
Yeah, it was really nice session. Like I'm from anthropology background, so it's something different for me, like hearing you. So my question is something that I faced personally while I was doing review of literature. It's like, how do you distinguish between synthesizing literature and flattening important difference between text or perspectives? Like how we can bring together from different authors. How do we make sure we don't oversimplify them or ignore the important way they differ?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I don't have a one-word answer to this question, but for instance, some of the literatures that I cited, uh, scholars are disagreeing with each other. For instance, Bell Hooks' criticism of some of the postmodern ideas of subjectivity. But at the same time, that's not the same as that of Kantian subject, right? So, so I think reading closely and trying to, again, historicizing the moments in which the scholarship comes kind of gives us some idea about what is the difference. Like Bill Hood's scholarship is also criticized much later by several scholars, right? So in that sense, I think having reading them closely with the text as well as with the time is important in helping us make sense of the slight differences each of them have, or big differences that each of them have from each other. So it really depends upon um, the the temporality, the historicity, and also, of course, there are a lot of theoretical frameworks that are drastically different from each other, right? Like we are talking about modern idea of how modernity perceived subjectivity and experience, how postmodernity perceived subjectivity and experience, how critical race theory scholars or feminist scholars perceives subjectivity and experience. Gopal Guru's idea is different from that, right? So how do we? So we can string together these differences as as a story, as as that's something we need to think about when we write review of literature. It's not just throwing in texts, right? It is stringing together a narrative. So what's the building block that you first choose to become the starting point? From there you build each block, right? If you start with life writing, what is life writing? How is it related to land and caste? Who talked about that? Then you talk about um, the relationship between subjectivity, land, and caste. So, in that sense, you are building blocks. Think of it as writing a story of scholarship in the field in relation to yours. So, yeah, so I don't have a blueprint, but I think it is something that as we read, um, as I said, think about the summary, think about the arguments. Once you write down the arguments, you can see how the other argument is not the same as that of this. So that, which also means it is in the details that we see the differences, the finer differences between different scholars. But if we start writing down and then try to build a blog, I think probably that would help us to have something that engages with them, not instrumentally. I think something that Gaurav also brought up, just citing them. That's, that's not something that we would want to do. We want to engage with each scholar that we cite, right? So we are respectful of everybody's work. So when we do that, I think we'll be able to see the differences. But of course, it takes time. It takes a lot of focus too.
Okay, thank you, Professor Christie. I hope that now we are a little bit pressed for time, so there is one more question, and then I would like to add, it's very mechanical aspect of literature review. But so I was wondering, what do you think about index in the books? And then Also, when one is looking for starting literature review, at least on the online front, like what are the resources that are really helpful and handy when it comes to, like, as in uh, beginning your search. And I think, should I just recap or summarize the question in the text? So Ramesh is concerned, as in he is in this dilemma that, like, whether he should follow the literature review first or should get informed by the his finding in the field. So which should be prioritized, and he's sort of like confused how to go ahead, like deciding between these two sort of like source of information. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jeff, for reading that out. So, Ramesh, I'm sure this differs for everyone, but for me, it was helpful to have the uh, data from the field, the materials, go through it several times. Of course, you will simultaneously read stuff for your review of literature, but the data also leads you to see what you are lacking in terms of scholarship, because the data demands that data probably shows you that you don't know enough about what this shows. So it will lead you to read more. Or when you feel stuck, when you feel that, oh, I have this data, but I don't know what to read, I think writing down that data, just transcribing that data will help you see what you have and what you need. So sometimes that's something that has helped me. Like uh, I would first like when I was doing this article, I read the text several times. I just transcribed a lot of it. Both the texts are written in Malayalam, so I wrote most of the text in English. So that helped me see through and understand what is there in the text, what is not there in the text, what I need to read for my review. So for some people, I think it could, I mean, of course, you would have some sense of what is out there, but engagement with the text is also very useful to go back and find what you would ultimately choose to do, because the data in some ways guides you too, but you also know that data is also subjective, so you need more than that too. So yeah, so it's kind of between both, but data can guide you as well. But this also takes me to Jay's question about the online resources. So these days, the first thing that we do is whenever we are doing research, we'll of course search for online resources, which which is very useful because we can find everything that is probably in the field when we do our online searches. But then that's also a very difficult thing because we have so much, right? But at the same time, I think because there is so much, for instance, if I'm looking at autobiographies, um, it would be beneficial to read instead of like generally looking at autobiographies. Now there is probably a lot of scholarship on autobiographies and environment, life writing and environment, or whatever your field is. So probably it helps to like read something that you think is closer to what you're thinking. And even if that's not directly related to your research, follow the bibliography and find other articles that could be useful. But again, when we use online resources, I would think that it's important to go to your library databases instead of like only looking at Google database or cloud database, because sometimes that's a lot. That's also very generic sometimes. I mean, it's useful, but at the same time, it could be very intimidating too. So if we go to our library database, other kinds of online academic databases that are available, I think that would kind of streamline our research, streamline our options, and we could have much more focused um, research, I mean, preliminary research So it's a combination. Of course, we can look at these popular platforms to have what is there, but then for reading, I think it would be beneficial for us to follow the academic databases, to confine our research to scholarly works. Was that the question you
Thank you.
asked, Jay?
Yeah, that was all. I asked about index and how do
Index,
you
yeah,
use index? Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So for us, I mean, for me, index always came after writing, but I know that some disciplines it's important for you to have an index and work
No, no,
towards it.
sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to correct myself. So I mean to ask, like, how index helps you to sort of like, look for keywords in the
Oh,
book.
yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, thanks for asking. Yeah, index is very beneficial. Thanks for bringing
Yeah,
it up. Yeah,
yeah.
that's the first thing we look at when we get a book. We all know that if you go to the index, we can spot concepts. So we go back to that page. Sometimes we don't have time to read the whole book, so we read those chapters instead of the whole book. So definitely, thanks for bringing it up, Jay. That's a beneficial tool for us to narrow down what we need to read. So definitely, index is something that we can rely on to narrow down to easily find things.
Thank you so much. This was such a wonderful talk, and I personally learned a lot. And my research also sort of like partially deals with subjectivity, and I am looking at not just subjectivity in terms of Adivasi communities, but within Adivasi communities, how it's experienced and narrated differently by, across genders and class. So it was very informative. I learned a lot. We all, I hope, have a lot to take away from this session. And thank you so much for